What's up, YouTube? This is 2RAW4TV. All right. So before I get into this video, I want to give a shout out to the brother Edward for the $10 donation via the Cash App. And he wanted me to do a review of the very popular X-Men 97 cartoon series that premiered last year. I'm sorry for the delay in me uploading this video. I was supposed to, at least I was trying to aim to upload it for yesterday evening, but you know, I had some other things to take care of, so I had to kind of delay actually recording this video. But the X-Men 97 10-part cartoon series is essentially a continuation or sequel to the 90s cartoon series that aired for, I think, 5 seasons from 92 to 97. We all remember growing up as children. We couldn't wait until the new episode come on every Saturday morning on Fox back in the day. But this was a continuation of that. I remember hearing a lot of great things about it, but I had just never actually sat down and watched the X-Men 97 cartoon series until now. And I have to say, it is absolutely amazing. It is great. And I'm already looking forward to the next season. Okay. So the first thing I noticed about the cartoon, the continuation of the cartoon, is that there's more of an emphasis to represent and showcase 90s culture. You see it with the hairstyles of the characters. You see it with the clothing. You see it with the music that they're playing in present day scenes. The club scene, you know, the Euro music. And I especially like the flashback scene with Charles, Xavier, and Magneto, which obviously, considering that this was the late 90s, this probably 1997, so it went back to maybe 30 years earlier, which would have been the 60s, and you could hear the song from the Byrds, "To Everything Turn, Turn, Turn." It set the mood of what era these different time periods are in. So that's one thing I noticed. I also noticed during the series there was one episode that played homage to the X-Men video game that came out, I think, in the I think it was the mid to late 90s. The way that the video game looked. So there are a lot of different Easter eggs in this series that I enjoyed. They're also in this series, although they're cameos, you do see some cameos of other Marvel characters. You see a cameo of Captain America, a couple of them, Captain America. There was a cameo of Daredevil, a cameo of General Ross, even though it technically really wasn't Hulk, a cameo of the Hulk. You know, so that was appreciative seeing that. So the series starts under the premise that Professor Xavier was assassinated by an anti-mutant extremist. And that is a little different from what we remember in the last episodes of the original cartoon run, where a dying Professor Xavier was taken in by, Empress Lilandra? And he left the X-Men, right? That was the only way she'd be able to save his life. When you start the cartoon, you operate under the assumption that, okay, well, he must have come back, restored, his health restored, and then he was taken out by this extremist. Although there was more to meet the eye when it comes to that. Magneto was strangely left in charge of the X-Men and what you call it, Charles Xavier's will, or whatever you want to call it, right? His directive after, his death. So he basically, what's the word you want to use? Bequoth the leadership of the X-Men to Magneto, which all the other X-Men found very, very odd. Why would you leave your baby? Why would you leave the leadership of everything that in various points in times Magneto fought against? Why would you have him in charge of the X-Men? But to Magneto's credit, though, he did accept the mantle of leadership, and he did try his very best to embrace Charles's path of tolerance. He stopped unaliving people. He tried to be more compassionate. He tried to be more reasonable. And he allowed the humans to put him on trial for his crimes, which ultimately he was, if I remember correctly, it was a series of events which led them to exonerate him, okay? And it got to a point where things were going so well on the surface that Genosha, which is basically like Israel for Jews, I hate to put it like that, but Genosha is supposed to be this land, a safe haven for mutants. It was to the point where Genosha was going to join the UN and be recognized as an official nation. And then all of a sudden, Genosha was attacked by Sentinels, okay? It was destroyed. And all but a few mutants were seemingly eliminated, exterminated. Gambit was killed in this attack. And, you kind of hope that, because, in Marvel world, nobody really stays dead forever, but at least for the duration of the cartoon series, Gambit was indeed dead. Now, there's also other storylines going on at the same time. One of the other storylines is that we find out that the Jean Grey that we see at the beginning of this series is not actually the real Jean Grey, but a clone. That clone and Cyborg give birth to a child, okay? And this child, whose name is Nathan, as we all know in the comic books, although it wasn't really acknowledged in the first cartoon series, that child is Cable when it comes back from the future, because the child had been infected with nanotechnology, and it was, if you know the comic book, you know that storyline. Jean Grey, or the Jean Grey that we become accustomed to at the beginning of the cartoon, is found out that it's not the original Jean Grey, but a clone. She takes on another name, Madeline, and she separates from the X-Men, goes to Genosha, but is ultimately killed in this attack by the Sentinels on Genosha. The attack on Genosha signals a change in Magneto. Magneto, who had embraced Charles Xavier's dream of coexisting between humans and mutants, gave up. He gave up. He said to himself time and time again, humans show their nature. They cannot coexist with us. They will always hurt us. They will always hunt us down. And even if there are periodic times when there's coexistence, the human will always show his nature. So Magneto lashes out, reverts to his old ways, And he goes on to try his best by reversing the magnetic poles and shutting down the magnetic grids which operate machinery and all different things. I'm not a huge technical guy, so excuse me if I'm not going into detail on that. But he tries to basically destroy the Earth. I mean, if you fuck with the magnetic poles, you know, that's going to be disastrous for the world. And he was going to destroy Earth and reshape it in his own image as far as a world for mutants. Now, at the same time, in other flashbacks, not flashbacks, excuse me, but what's the term I want to use? Cut scenes to other things going on. We find out that Charles Xavier is not dead. Matter of fact, Charles Xavier is on the verge of becoming an emperor with Princess or Empress Lalandra. And Charles had been enjoying his life all these, I'm assuming what has been a couple of years now, from looking at how much older Jubilee looks. I mean, she's still, I think, only 18, but she's definitely older than what she was in the cartoon in the 90s. So Charles Xavier, you know what I'm saying, he's happy. He still thinks about the X-Men, but he's moved on. And he believes that, from all he can tell, from all intents and purposes, that things are going great. Until he actually uses his powers and he can detect that a grave calamity has occurred where several of his X-Men have been hurt and even with Gambit killed. So he gives up this paradise, this life of luxury and prestige to go back to his students, because that was what was most important to him, his X-Men. He comes back and he sees that they're angry at him. They felt abandoned. The world finds out that Charles Xavier actually was still alive. From their perspective, they think that the X-Men created this ruse of Charles Xavier being assassinated by this extremist to garner sympathy. So humans begin to turn on mutants. And this goes all according to plan for one Bastion, who is the main antagonist in this cartoon series. Now, there's also the presence of other antagonists. Mr. Sinister, who appears to be at first the main antagonist, but is actually Bastion. Now, from what I can tell from the cartoon, because I was not familiar with Bastion, but Bastion appears to be the quote unquote offspring of, I guess, Mega Mold and what's the other one? Mega Mold and I can't remember the Nimrod, I think it is. I think he is basically the fusion of the technology DNA imprint of Mega Mold and Nimrod and a human. And he was birthed by two people, and he could see the technology in his head, you know what I'm saying? It was embedded in him on a genetic cellular level. And as he grows older, he begins to develop, because it's in his DNA, an extreme hatred for mutants. And he joins anti-mutant groups as a young man. Also, of course, because of these things being in his DNA, he is technically a mutant, but he hates mutants. You know, at least I think he's a mutant because he has powers like a mutant, but he hates. Excuse me, 1 second. Yeah, but Bastion hates mutants, and he comes up with this plan of basically his original plan, I believe, is of mutants more or less being slaves to humanity, and humans being essentially an upgrade of mutants, and still being in part of this, sort of like him, having upgrade technology, being sort of like these human cyborgs, with, you know, mutants basically being the worker bees, the slaves of humanity. That was his tempered, you know, sympathy, you know, having empathy with mutants. As he become less and less human, because he fuses with technology more and more throughout the duration of the series, he becomes more and more unhinged, less human, more mechanical, and less empathy, to the point where he changes and augments his plans to the point where he thinks that humanity needs to be destroyed. And basically restarted. Kind of like Magneto, but on a whole different level. So ultimately, everybody, for at least toward the end of the cartoon series, from what I can tell, through just the sheer situation itself, they do everything they can to stop Bastion. This guy Bastion's a tough motherfucker, man. He's extraordinarily powerful. It takes the will of everybody and the combined actions and help of everybody to actually ultimately take him down. And it's still not determined fully whether or not Bastion is gone. He still may be out there. It appears that he was killed at the end, but we don't know that for certain. And the cartoon ends with the X-Men seemingly vaporized, but it appears that ultimately what happened was that they were infused in a different timeline, and now they're like back in 3000 BC. They meet a young Insabanur, and the very last scene shows Insabanur maybe 6,000 years later in his celestial form, or celestial technological form, the form that we grew accustomed to looking at or seeing on the old cartoons as Apocalypse. So it appears that it was Apocalypse that sent them into a different timeline, maybe, or it may be Cable, who knows? I don't know. So that would be the kickstart for next season. And I'm assuming that Apocalypse will be the main villain for season 2. And as all you guys know, if you look at my avatar, I'm a huge Apocalypse fan. So as far as this cartoon series, from 1 to 10, I give it a full 10. I thought the voice acting was great. Interestingly, I believe for the most part, they've had the same voice actors from 25 years ago reprise their voices, although you can hear the age in some of their voices, especially Wolverine and Rogue. You can hear the age. Interestingly, the voice actor who's doing Cyclops sounds almost exactly the same as he did 30 years ago, but that's not the same voice actor from what I could tell. The original voice for Cyclops is dead. The original voice for Charles Xavier, I believe, not take that back. I think I'm thinking about the original cartoon X-Men and the Pride of X-Men, Kitty Pryde, what the hell it was called. But the original voice actor for Apocalypse died 25 years ago. But other than that, man, the voice acting is great. The pacing is great. There's also other things that happen. Storm temporarily lost her powers. You see the introduction of other characters. There is also a human named, I think her name is Valerie Cooper. She's a government official who initially starts off as very skeptical of mutants, but as she observes how humanity tends to show their prejudice against against mutants, she becomes much more sympathetic toward the mutant cause as the series progresses. And there's also this romantic back and forth, this romantic triangle of sorts between Magneto, Rogue, and Gambit for the first half of the series. So that's a little bit of an undercurrent too. And also the one other thing I want to point out is in the last episode, or the penultimate episode, Magneto, while being attacked by Wolverine, I don't know how the hell he survived being impaled by adamantium claws, but he literally rips out, as we saw in the comic strip, he literally rips out Wolverine's adamantium from his bones. Now, I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to assume that Wolverine is going to survive, although he was barely clinging on in that last episode. But from what I remember about the comic strip, the adamantium not only was slowing down his powers a bit, but it was also slowing down the progression of his feralism. Or I don't know if I'm using the right word, or how hairy and feral he was becoming and looking. That's why he never looked like Sabretooth. That's why he still looked more human. If I'm not mistaken, with the adamantium off his bones now, his regenerative powers are going to be even more impressive. But I also think he's going to probably advance to a more feral looking state. I think he's going to be more wilder, more unpredictable, more savage. And it's to the point where he's going to have to control his animal instincts more often. So for what I'm basically saying is, if anything, I think Magneto, without his knowledge without knowing in hand, he actually is going to make Wolverine stronger, is what I'm basically trying to say. But anyway, yeah, this was a great series, man. Sorry if I rambled a little bit in this one, because I'm trying to go back and forth in my head with different things. I probably should have wrote down some notes, but this was a great, great series. I strongly advise you to watch this series. I think the second season should be coming soon. I got to look this up. But anyway, tell me what you guys think.